Welcome to A New You. I'm here with Daryl Taylor, and I'd like to speak with you perhaps about your youth. You said you grew up in rural Victoria. Can you let us know a little bit about your childhood and what brought you to do the work that you do?
So I grew up I started out life at Waiai, so we were in servants' quarters on a lay Methodist minister's farm. So it was a big 640-acre farm, and my mum was the milkmaid, and she also was the maid in the house. And my dad was a herd tester, which means he travelled around farms on a monthly cycle, testing the butterfat and also the protein and the microbiology of the milk. We were on this very, very big farm, it was quite isolating, I suppose. And although my mum's family was huge, so there was lots of cousins, and so I often got palmed out maybe to the cousins for a fortnight at a time at different times. But it was north of Shepparton, so between Yarrawonga and Echuca along the Murray River, and one of my early memories is just camping out by the Murray and back in the day when it was a clear river, so in the 1960s.
Excellent. So tell me, did your cousins live rurally too?
Yeah, pretty much all the boys were on farms, so I would go out and help my uncles on the farms from a very young age. So it was feeding calves, feeding hay out to cattle. I can remember driving the tractor as a 3-year-old. So my job was just to turn at the end of each bay and follow the check banks around in a pattern.
Wow.
And I got that pattern fairly early and was able to manage that role while 2 adults fed the hay off the back.
Amazing. 3 years old.
Yeah, it was kind of we didn't think any different of it because the kids were all active on the farm from a very young age.
Yeah. So looking at your profile LinkedIn on LinkedIn, you have a huge scope of services. Like, it's intimidating almost when I'm reading it. How do you manage yourself, and how do you manage...
Obviously not well. My LinkedIn profile hasn't been updated for at least a decade.
Sounds like me.
And, I think one of my core challenges is just executive function and management, self-management, those kind of things, and even self-regulation to some degree too. So, how one processes all the different parallel things that one has to attend to in a modern society. I often just completely forget about really important things like paying fines and things like that. So, I've ended up in justice system things, sewing bags together because I've had to make up all these hours.
Community work.
Yeah, so the community justice system, just because I forget completely about paying fines. So I'm good at doing whatever I'm doing, but not necessarily good at remembering the other things that I'm meant to also be attending to.
So going on from what you just said then, can you let me know a little bit about how your particular mind works or your particular brain? So you've spoken about what you struggle with. What are the benefits that come forth from it?
Yeah, I haven't really spoken about this before, so I'm on a bit of a learning journey. It's a bit of a steep curve at the moment. So I think growing up, I was able to process things mathematically and also spatially very, very quickly, and also with language. So that was super useful just going into mainstream classes in school because I was a long way ahead of the other kids. And in grade 1, I can remember my maths teacher, Lynn Hyde, getting me out in front of the composite grade 1 and 2 class and just asking me abstract mathematics questions, which I was able to do for 20 minutes or so. And I think I was abstracted, so just not really in the room, just in my head doing the maths. And at the end of that process, I was kind of asked to sit down, and I was a little embarrassed because everyone was kind of a bit slack-jaw in the class just looking at me, so I was pretty self-conscious about that. But yeah, I ended up being able to spend the rest of the year in with the grade 5s, which was a lot of fun. And it meant that, yeah, I got kind of pushed along, particularly with my maths and my language. I think at that stage I'd probably, read all of the spelling books for the whole, up through to grade 6 and done a lot of those kind of things. So, yeah, I think my dad is probably a bit similar. So he grew up in Reservoir and went to University High School, so he was in the state gifted program. So yeah, I was assessed at high school as being gifted, which was a nice thing to have recognised, I suppose, but there wasn't really any resources or services to support that at the rural high school where I went, so it kind of became more of a burden because the kids weren't very interested in the fact that I could do abstract mathematics and was good at poetry.
I could imagine. I was going to ask you, how did that affect you socially? Because being pushed up in years, I suppose that would have asked you to develop more mature social skills as well.
Yeah, I mean the accelerated or hot house period was just when I was 6, so I went back into my own class after grade 1.
Okay.
But yeah, the teachers gave myself and also 2 other students a lot of extra work, which was great. They pushed us along all the way through until the end of grade 6, but really the high school had no facility to do anything for us, so we kind of, I think really I wagged a lot. I bought beer from the pub and we used to go down to the creek and get drunk, and I would just have to get back in time to catch the school bus home and sober up before I got home.
Oh, wow.
So we ended up being very, very naughty, and I think I spent most of, pretty much every week, if not every day, in the principal's office. So, it was a pretty tough and rough school, and there wasn't much interest in excelling academically at that school, so I kind of focused a lot more on sport because that was kind of what was acceptable, and yeah, it was kinesthetically I was okay, so I was able to play basketball, cricket, tennis, football, all the things.
Wonderful. So speaking yesterday, you gave me a long list of words which, when condensed, amounts to the word hyper-arousal. Can you let me know a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still discovering this space. Like, I recently had an assessment with an autism specialist. So, among other things, I had epilepsy as a kid. So it was Sylvie and Spike, and I took Dilantin for 10 years and had a neurologist. And that was an interesting process, lots of EEGs, lots of, recording electrical activity in my brain. But, I think the autism is only relatively new. So I think I, was very interested in information and didn't instinctively know how to socialise. So, I used maths and patterns to help me make sense of human relationships as a kid. So permutations and combinations of relationships and Venn diagrams and just anything like set theory that helped understand, what it was that people were doing when they were socially and emotionally engaging with one another, because it was fairly foreign to me. I was fairly awkward, I think, socially and emotionally, and still to this day don't have a strong sense of how I feel if someone asks me how I feel.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so with regard to the hyperarousal, I'm kind of interested in this. Like, apparently it's very common for people with autism to have anxiety. I know particularly at high school I had a lot of depression, so I would have been depressed in year 8 and also again in year 10, and then developed hypomania and wasn't able to finish school at the school that I went to. I was institutionalised in a psychiatric institution, so ended up at Mont Park, which is kind of out near La Trobe University. There was a series of institutions, Jane Field and Larundel, all out in that area. So, my school wasn't interested in having me back after that, so I had to go out of area to high school.
That's awful.
The next year So, just kind of, I'm really interested in how people, what their primary diagnosis was. And because, we grew up in a generation where no one really heard of neurodivergency. So I'm sure there was loads of neurodivergent kids at my school, but it just wasn't a thing that had a name. And my daughter is very funny about all of this. She went to a little primary school. There were 8 kids at the primary school. And
Wonderful.
we shifted her across to a second school where there was 32 to be in the catchment for Eltham High School. And then she went to Eltham High School and there was 1,200 kids. So it was it was huge for her. And she, what I love about Maggie was her and a friend wove together a community of the kids who were marginalised, who weren't kind of alpha male, alpha female, or weren't neuronormative. And so all of her friends have got some kind of neurodivergency diagnosis. And, Mag's quite infamous for asking her dad at one stage, "Dad, did you think you were normal?" And I said, "Well, I think I've done my best to try to fit in." And she laughed at the fact that I thought I was normal for probably 4 minutes, and to the point where she nearly fell off her chair. So it's been really learning through my daughter and her peers. Like, we had a 2-story house in Eltham, and so we hosted a lot of them. So this was like, my mind was just kind of going ding, 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 like learning how they interacted and how they made sense of the world. And so one of Maggie's friends, Tash, told me that I was a TED talker. So, I didn't engage emotionally or relationally. I just shared information, if that makes sense.
That's
so,
excellent.
That again kind of helped me pause. And so, to some degree, this year, I'm really just starting to get to know, who I am. So, I've always been interested in the Sylvian spike epilepsy because that was in the language centre of the brain. Can you
tell me about that? That doesn't ring a bell
for
me.
Yeah, I just had grand mal fits when I was a kid. So, my parents saw me having the grand mal fits, and I got specialist medical attention. I was a part of a group. There were, it came out of Cambridge, I think, and the research study included a cohort in Sweden and a cohort in Australia. So I was part of the Australian cohort that led to the diagnosis of infantile epilepsy. So the treatment that I got meant that I haven't had a fit since. But
that's great.
What I've started to learn from neurodivergency, and particularly autism, there's a lot of comorbidities. So things like physical injuries and inflammatory disorders, and particularly for me, really clicky, hyperflexible, hypermobile joints. Some about this too. So that's been interesting as well, that my body's different as well as my mind being different, and just little learnings like the other day when I met the specialist, she was saying, as far as they're aware, autism's been around for about 75,000 years. And so it was a departure from, the much more socially engaged human to the much more information
So how's that then? Maybe you are an evolution, maybe autism is actually an evolutionary step.
Yeah, one of my
that's a concept.
Yeah, one of my previous partners who had an autistic diagnosis, that was very much her opinion. Yeah, so I was still learning about my own neurodivergency at the time, but she'd been, she had a family, where there was a lot of neurodivergency, and I look at my family now. We just kind of thought we were normal. We didn't realise there was anything necessarily different about us. But I suppose there's an idea called twice exceptional. So I can remember when I was studying, I got into a triple degree, but I got kicked out because I had a history of mental illness, and so I was going to go home and work in the cheese factory.
That sounds discriminatory.
Yeah, it was super discriminatory, but at the time the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission wouldn't take on the case, so there wasn't precedence where there'd been success. So I ended up, nursing was making the transition from hospital-based training to university education. So I did, I went along to the nursing course at Lincoln Institute of Health Sciences and just basically asked if there were any positions still available, and I had Joan Heath come out, who was in her 60s, and I kind of explained exactly what had happened with the professor at RMIT, and she said, well, you know, that seems unfair, I'm happy to give you a place. It was about 6 weeks into the course, so I had to catch up, and I was really proud. Like, in final year I got a series of hundreds for a lot of the subjects
I'm so sure you did.
Joan taught. So it was just lovely to be able to, do really well in her subjects, given that she gave me a chance. And I think we were about 2/3 of the way in first year, and they did a whole bunch of assessments on us. I think there was 3 PhD nursing students who were studying our cohort, and my nickname was 3 standard deviations after that. So they did a whole bunch of just all sorts of IQ tests and things like that. So, what I'm learning about now is the idea of twice exceptional. So, probably looking at an autistic and an ADHD diagnosis in addition to just academic giftedness, particularly around mathematics and also around language. So
you're an amazing person.
Well, it's been interesting because I'm failing on a whole lot of other fronts. So
don't worry about
that.
them.
It's a balancing.
I just want to ask one more question. And I met you at a fire night, I think it was, at Earthship, or the house that you have up in the hills. And can you let me know about how the fires affected you and through your journey through that?
Yeah, so I've become interested in trauma, just my own experiences and watching others' experiences growing up. And then particularly, I was interested in mental health, and I'm interested in the role trauma plays in as a catalyst towards a mental health diagnosis. And certainly there's a lot more evidence to support that now, rather than just a standard biomedical model, based in genetics or based in chemical imbalance. So, the aftermath of the fires in particular, we were fully engaged in the disaster recovery process. And so, that was a whole community experience, and probably a few years in, people started to drop off with chronic fatigue or, similar things because they'd just exhausted their adrenal system, and we're finding collapse was what was happening. And so I've subsequently learnt that, what I might have called depression may also be called autistic burnout. And so, I struggled with that a lot at high school, making the transition from the intimate classrooms, with a consistent teacher to, just all the chaos of high school, changing classes every 45 minutes, etc. So, that link between trauma and, just the opportunity to rebuild, where I live is the most fire vulnerable human settlement in history. So, we're just highly vulnerable just because the escarpment's really steep and our settlement's on top of the escarpment, and it's a pyrophilic eucalypt forest
and
below.
All those trees, there's so many trees around.
So for me, rebuilding in that area, it was important to do something significant because we're likely to have at least another 4 or 5 major fires this century. So I put the mud brick house that we bought, which was a small 10 square home.
Good to go.
Yeah, put it underground. So it's
put it underground?
Yeah, so it's underground on the south, and I built an extension as well and put that underground to the southwest.
Wow.
So that's been super exciting just to sort of be a bit of a pioneer around Pyro-tecture. So the kind of, or Terra-tecture, so using earth materials and also using the earth as a barrier to protect. And really kind of inspired by the wombats who did really well during the fire.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to come and see your home. That sounds fascinating.
And I think just going back, like the new you component, like, the things that I've been thinking about with regard to this lately have been really around it's sort of struck up as anxiety, and I'm kind of curious between, when one's significantly different from one's peers, whether it's anxiety or curiosity. And I'm kind of like a mix of those two, I think, was me growing up. The focus is often on the anxiety, but I think, I can remember making the transition from primary school to secondary school, and, it was maybe about 6 weeks in again, and I can remember just saying to my peers from my primary school, my friends from primary school, that it wasn't just that there was 10 times more students at high school, but the permutations and combinations of relationships were almost infinitely larger than at primary school. And they didn't really factor in that I'd worked out in 6 weeks the names of everyone at the school, where they were from, who they were related to, and what they were kind of most interested in, who they were dating. All of those things were just of interest to me, and I'm never really sure, and I hope to explore this more, whether that's about creating a safe environment to make it easy to navigate, or whether it's just pure curiosity and trying to fill in gaps in knowledge.
It sounds like your mind is a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, I loved. Look, it can be a burden and a legacy.
Of course.
I think the epilepsy, depression, getting a bipolar diagnosis now, coming to terms with autism and ADHD as well. So
fun.
Yeah, and chronic fatigue. So all of these things. So yeah, I struggle through most days. I wouldn't say I'm successful on a whole bunch of parameters, but yeah, just enjoying, continuing to be curious and working out not just how I work, but how the context within which we live our lives unfolds, and how to be, I suppose, prepared. So the preparedness part has been important with regard to emergencies and fires, but also just for some of the other contextual and relational changes that we face.
Wonderful. Well, I think that sounds like a good place to wrap up this conversation, Daryl.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming in and
pleasure.
sharing a bit about your reality. It's certainly been informative.
All right, thank you. Cheers, Eva.